No one touches her. Mafia boss said, after discovering the maid's hidden secret past, Ravenhill was not a house. It was a fortress of glass and cold, polished stone perched above the city. Its windows watched the sprawl of lights below, a constant reminder of the territory Luca Romano controlled. The estate was a monument to power, built with the profits of underground rivalries that left scars on the city streets. It was into this world of silent, heavy luxury that Elena arrived, carrying a single, worn bag and a past she kept buried so deep it barely felt like her own. She began as a new maid, one of several, but she was the only one who seemed determined to be invisible. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Petrova, a woman whose spine was as unbending as the marble columns in the foyer, had laid out the rules on Elena's first day. You do not speak to Mr. Romano. You do not look at Mr. Romano. You are here to clean the messes, not to make them. You are invisible. For Elena, invisibility was a shield she had perfected long ago. She wore the plain gray uniform, her dark hair pulled back in a severe, functional bun that hid its length and wave. She kept her head down, her gaze fixed on the Italian marble she polished or the thick pile carpets she vacuumed. She took the late shifts, the ones that started after sunset and ended in the small, cold hours of the morning when the vast, echoing halls were empty. She scrubbed kitchens and polished silver long after the chef had gone home. Her only company, the hum of the industrial refrigerators and the ticking of a grandfather clock in the main hall. Her silence was absolute. She never spoke unless a direct question was asked, and even then, her answers were a whispered, "Yes, ma'am," or "No, sir." The other staff, the cooks and gardeners and security men, noticed. At first, they mistook her silence for arrogance. Soon, they saw the truth. It was fear. "She's like a ghost," one of the younger maids whispered in the laundry room. "A pretty ghost, though the boss doesn't like ghosts. She's running from something," the head of security said, watching her on the monitors. Or someone. Luca Romano noticed her on the second day. He was a man who thrived on observation. His survival, and the survival of his organization, depended on noticing the things that were out of place, and Elena was profoundly out of place. He sat in his study, the walls lined with books he never read and secrets he kept, reviewing the security feeds. He watched her work. She was meticulous, her movements efficient, but her entire body was coiled, a spring wound so tight it vibrant. She existed in a permanent state of bracing for a blow. He saw her flinch when a heavy door slammed shut 2 floors below. She did not jump. She froze, her hand tightening on a scrub brush, her back rigid, her eyes squeezing shut for 1, 2, 3 seconds before she resumed her work. A few days later, he was walking through the hall as his capo, Antonio, discussed a business matter. Antonio mentioned a rival family, the Falcones, and their new connection to a crew out of Detroit. The name meant nothing to Luca in that moment, but as they passed the library, he saw Elena, who was dusting a high shelf. She had gone utterly still. The color drained from her face, leaving her skin a waxy, pale shade. The feather duster slipped from her numb fingers and drifted to the floor. She stared at the wall, her breathing shallow, her whole being trapped in a moment of sheer terror triggered by a name spoken in passing. Luca stopped walking. Antonio, sensing the shift, fell silent. Elena seemed to realize she was being watched. Her eyes darted to Luca, wide and panicked, then immediately dropped to the floor. "I'm sorry, sir, I dropped it." She bent to retrieve the duster, her hands trembling so badly she could barely close her fingers around the handle. Luca said nothing. He just watched her, his gaze intense, analytical. He was not intrigued by her beauty, which he had noted in a detached, objective way. The high cheekbones, the full mouth she kept pressed into a thin line, the eyes that were the color of dark whiskey. He was intrigued by the depth of her fear. It was old, it was real, and it was in his house. That night, he found her in the main kitchen. It was past 2 in the morning. He had come down for a glass of water, moving with the inherent silence of a predator. He found her not working, but huddled on the cold tile floor between the steel counters and the walk-in pantry. her knees drawn to her chest, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. The moment he stepped into the light, she gasped, a sound of pure panic, and scrambled to her feet. She backed against the counter, her hands raised slightly, as if to ward off a strike. "Mr. Romano," she whispered. Her voice choked. "I'm sorry, I will go." He studied her. The tear tracks on her cheeks, the raw red of her eyes, the way her entire frame trembled. She was terrified of him, expecting punishment, expecting him to yell or strike or fire her. He did none of those things. Luca turned his back to her, a move that in his world was either supreme arrogance or a calculated gesture of trust. He opened the refrigerator, took out a carton of milk, and poured a glass. He opened a cabinet, found the honey, and stirred a spoonful into the milk. He set the glass on the granite island, the ceramic making a soft click in the silence. He did not look at her again. He simply walked out of the kitchen, leaving her alone with the warm glass of milk and her own suffocating confusion. Elena did not sleep that night. She drank the milk, the warmth spreading through her cold limbs, and cried again, not from fear, but from a strange, aching bewilderment. She began to notice things. Small, almost imperceptible changes. The security camera in the narrow corridor that led to the maid's quarters, the one that had always made her feel watched and exposed, was now angled slightly upward, its lens aimed at a crack in the ceiling plaster. It had created a blind spot, one that covered her door entirely. A week later, she was polishing the grand staircase when Luca descended, deep in a phone conversation, his voice the low, sharp baritone of command. She pressed herself flat against the wall, head down, making herself small. He walked past, but his conversation paused. She heard him say to Mrs. Petrova, who was in the hall, "The dining room chandelier can wait. See that she gets a full break." His tone had not been kind. Not truly. It was still the voice of a man who gave orders. But the ice that usually coated his words was absent. It was neutral, considerate. In this house. That was a profound kindness. The true shift happened a month after her arrival. Luca was hosting a meeting in his private lounge. It was a smoke-filled room of dangerous men in expensive suits. Elena was sent in to serve drinks, a task she dreaded. Her hands were steady, but her pulse hammered against her ribs. One of the men, a new client from Chicago with slick hair and restless, greedy eyes, watched her as she poured his scotch. He did not look at her face, but at her body, his gaze lingering on her chest and then her hips, a slow, appraising, owning look. Elena went pale. She felt a familiar, sickening crawl of bile in her throat. She had felt that look before. It was the look of a man who saw a thing, not a person. She finished the pour and turned to leave, but the man's voice, thick with whiskey, stopped her. "You're new. I haven't seen you before." Elena froze, her back to him. "Answer him, Mrs. Petrova hissed from the doorway. "Yes, sir." Elena whispered to the floor. "Look at me when I'm talking to you, sweetheart." Before she could move, before she could force her muscles to obey, Luca's voice cut through the smoke, as cold and sharp as a shard of ice. Her eyes are where they need to be. "Marco." The room went silent. Elena risked a glance. Luca had not moved from his armchair. He was leaning forward slightly, his own glass of whiskey untouched on the table. He was not looking at Elena. He was looking at Marco, and his expression was flat, devoid of all warmth, all civility. It was the face he wore when he was passing a sentence. "We're discussing the routes through the 3rd District," Luca said, his voice dangerously soft. "Not my staff." Marco's smirk faltered. He cleared his throat and looked away from Elena. "Right, yeah, the routes." Luca gestured to the door with his chin. "You can go." Elena fled. She did not hear the rest of the conversation, but when Marco left an hour later, he was sweating, and he did not look at anyone. That night, the storm hit Ravenhill. It was a brutal, late autumn tempest that threw rain against the windows like handfuls of gravel. The wind howled, and the power, even in Luca's fortified estate, flickered. Elena was in the old service elevator. taking a basket of fresh linens to the third floor. The lights buzzed, flickered, and died, plunging her into absolute suffocating darkness. And the elevator stopped. It didn't just stop, it shuddered, dropped a foot, and then hung, swaying slightly in the shaft. Elena's breath hitched. The darkness was total. The air was close. The metal walls were pressing in. She hit the emergency button. Nothing. She hit it again and again, her breath coming faster. She was trapped. The air was too thick. She couldn't breathe. It was dark. He was coming. She slid down the wall, her nails scraping the metal, a sob tearing from her throat. She was back in that other place, the dark place, the place she had run from. She banged on the door, her pleas lost to the sound of the thunder. Luca was in his study when the main lights went out. The emergency generators kicked in within seconds, bathing his wing in low, amber light, but the service wing was dark. He heard it, a faint, frantic banging. He knew, instantly, where it was coming from. He knew who was on that shift. He didn't call security. He went himself. He grabbed a heavy-duty flashlight and a pry bar from the emergency closet. He took the main stairs 2 at a time. The third-floor landing was dark. He found the elevator doors and shone the light into the crack. "Elena!" he yelled over the storm. A terrified, broken wail came from below. He jammed the pry bar into the seam and used his entire weight, the muscles in his back and shoulders straining, until the doors groaned and scraped open. She was about 5 feet below, huddled in the corner, a small, dark shape. She was hyperventilating, rocking back and forth. "Elena, stop!" His voice was a command, but it cut through her panic. "I'm getting you out. Stand up. Give me your hands." "I can't," she sobbed. "I can't move." He swore, a low, vicious sound. He knelt, braced himself against the doorframe, and lowered himself partway into the shaft. He was strong, but it was a dangerous angle. "You have to meet me. Reach up." She saw his silhouette against the flashlight's beam. She pushed herself up, her limbs shaking, and stretched out a trembling hand. He grabbed her wrist, his grip like a steel manacle, and hauled. He pulled her up, his arm locked around her waist, and dragged her out of the blackness and onto the solid floor of the landing. The second her feet were on the carpet, her legs buckled. She didn't faint, she collapsed, falling forward directly into him. Luca caught her. His arms went around her automatically, one hand spreading wide across her back, the other cradling the back of her head. She was small in his arms, and she was shaking so violently it felt like she might come apart. She buried her face in his shirt, her hands gripping his jacket, clinging to him as the only solid thing in a world that had just tried to swallow her. He stood there in the dark hallway, the storm raging outside, and just held her. He felt the fragility of her bones, the rabid, quick hammering of her heart against his chest. His jaw tightened until his teeth ached. A cold, protective anger surged through him. It was an anger at the faulty wiring, at the storm, at the sheer, overwhelming terror that had its hooks so deep in this woman. He lifted her. She weighed almost nothing. He carried her to a nearby sitting room, kicked the door open, and laid her on a plush velvet sofa. He lit a battery-powered lamp, casting the room in a soft glow. "I'm calling the doctor," he said. "No!" Her voice was shrill. She scrambled to sit up, her eyes wide with a new, different terror. "No, doctor, please, Mr. Romano, please, I'm fine." He looked at her, really looked at her. She was shaking her head, tears streaming down her face, her hands clenched in the fabric of her skirt. She was not afraid of a checkup. She was afraid of the doctor, afraid of being touched, of being examined. Luca understood. The realization settled in him, cold and hard. He pulled his phone from his pocket, but he didn't call the doctor. He called his head of security. "The service elevator is out. Get it fixed by dawn and find out why it wasn't on the generator." He hung up without waiting for a reply. He pulled a heavy cashmere blanket from the back of a chair and draped it over her. She flinched at his proximity but didn't pull away. Then he did the last thing she ever expected. He sat down. He didn't leave. He didn't demand answers. He didn't offer platitudes. He simply sat in the large leather armchair across from her, a silent, imposing guardian in the dim light. He rested his ankle on his knee, his hands resting on the arms of the chair. He just sat, and he watched, and he waited. An hour passed. The storm began to subside. The only sounds were the rain and the ticking of the clock. Elena's trembling slowly eased. The adrenaline drained away, leaving her exhausted. But the panic was gone. The presence of this dangerous, powerful man, who had done nothing but sit in silence, had made her feel safer than she had in years. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was wrecked, but it was steady. "Thank you," she whispered to her hands, which were clutched in her lap. Luca nodded once. It was an acknowledgement, an acceptance. She was still wary of him. He was, she knew, a man capable of terrible things, but the raw animal fear she had felt in his presence was gone, replaced by something complicated and strange. He had seen her broken, and he had not hurt her. The next afternoon, the sun was out, washing the grounds in pale, watery light. Luca stood on the expansive stone balcony of his study, smoking a cigarette. He watched Elena. She was walking in the garden, near the high, ivy-covered walls at the far end of the property. She was moving slowly, her hands tucked into the pockets of a borrowed coat, her face tilted toward the weak warmth. She still looked like a fawn, ready to bolt at the first sound, but she was not bolting. She was walking in his garden. She was in his territory. She was his. He took a slow drag, the smoke curling into the cold air. The puzzle of her was no longer a mild curiosity. It was an obsession. He whispered the words to the empty air, a vow spoken to himself. "What are you running from, Elena?" The incident in the elevator had changed the air in the house. Elena still worked, still kept her head down, but the fear that had once clung to her like a second skin had shifted. She was no longer terrified of Luca. She was terrified of something else, something he had kept at bay with a blanket and a silent vigil. She became more comfortable. In small, almost imperceptible ways, she no longer flinched when he entered a room. She simply stilled, her hands pausing in their work, her head bowed in acknowledgement. Once, when he passed her in the hall, she met his eyes for a single, fleeting second before looking away, her cheeks flushing, but her other fear, the deep, foundational one, remained. Luca's men were a constant presence, and they talked. They spoke of routes, of shipments, of trouble at the border. Elena learned to tune out their words, to make the drone of their voices part of the house's ambient noise. But certain words still cut through. Cartel, Mexico, border. When she heard them, she would disappear. If she was polishing the dining table, she would suddenly find an urgent need to fetch a new cloth from the kitchens. 2 floors down, if she was in the kitchen, she would retreat into the pantry, organizing cans that were already perfectly aligned. Luca cataloged every retreat. He saw the pattern. He knew she wasn't just quiet. She was actively, skillfully avoidant. 2 weeks after the storm, he decided to force the issue. He was holding a private meeting in his study with 3 of his most trusted associates. It was late afternoon, the sun casting long, severe shadows across the Persian rug. He buzzed the housekeeper. "Mrs. Petrova, send Elena in with coffee," and there was a pause on the line. "Sir, Maria is on the afternoon service." "I want Elena," he said, his voice leaving no room for discussion, and hung up. When Elena entered, she was balancing a heavy, ornate silver tray. The cups and saucers were rattling faintly against each other, the only sign of her nerves. She kept her gaze fixed on the tray, her movements careful, practiced. She served the first man, then the second. The men in the room paid her no attention, continuing their conversation. "The territory is stable." One of them, a heavy-set man named Sal, said, "The only real threat is spillover. The feds are squeezing the Sonora routes." Elena's hand did not shake. "It's not the feds I'm worried about," Luca said, his eyes on the report in his lap. "It's the infighting. The old families are at war." Sal nodded, taking his cup from Elena. "True. And the Del Rosa family is getting desperate. They're pushing north, looking for something, or someone. They're making noise all the way to Chicago." Del Rosa. The name hit the air, and Elena's entire world stopped. It was not a flinch. It was a full-body paralysis. The heavy silver tray tilted in her hands, the porcelain cups slid. The sound of the coffee pot hitting the floor was deafening, followed instantly by the sharp, crystalline shatter of the cups as the entire service crashed onto the priceless rug. Hot coffee splashed, narrowly missing Sal's imported leather shoes. The room went utterly silent. The three men stared, annoyed and surprised. Elena stood frozen, her hands still outstretched, her face drained of all color. She was paper white, her eyes wide and blank, staring at the wall just past Luca's shoulder. She was not seeing the study. She was somewhere else, somewhere terrible. "Get out," Sal barked at her. "You clumsy." "Sal," Luca said. His voice was quiet, but it sliced through the other man's anger. Sal's mouth snapped shut. Luca's gaze was fixed on Elena. He had his answer. He had the key. He had seen her terror in the elevator. But this was different. This was recognition. "Elena," he said. His voice was neutral, almost soft. She didn't respond. She was trembling. Her breath held tight in her chest. "Elena, leave." The command finally broke through her stupor. She looked down at the mess, her eyes filling with shame and a terror so profound it made her physically sick. I'm sorry. I'll clean it." "Now," Luca said. She fled, practically running from the room, a choked sob escaping her as the door clicked shut. Mrs. Petrova, who had heard the crash, appeared in the doorway, her face pale. Luca waved her in. "Clean this, and send Maria with a fresh service. Elena is done for the day." He turned back to his men, his expression unreadable. "As you were saying, Sal, they're desperate." He found her hours later. She was in the industrial laundry room, long after her shift should have ended. She was scrubbing a grease stain on a canvas apron, a task she had already completed twice. She was scrubbing it because it was the only thing she could focus on. He entered the room, and the scent of bleach and hot steam filled his lungs. He leaned against the doorframe, watching her. "You're going to scrub a hole through that," he said. She jumped, spinning around, her hands red and raw from the lye. "Mr. Romano." He walked toward her slowly. He wasn't her boss now. He was an interrogator, but he kept his voice gentle. "Are you all right? Your hands are bleeding." She hid them behind her back. "I'm fine. I'm so sorry about the mess and the cups. It was just clumsy. The tray was heavy. It slipped." She was lying, and she was a terrible liar. Her eyes darted to the floor, to the wall, to the exit, anywhere but at him. "It slipped," he repeated, his voice flat. "Yes. I don't know what happened. I'm sorry. I will pay for the damage." He knew she had maybe $200 to her name. He almost smiled at the absurdity, at the bravery of the lie. He looked at the raw fear in her eyes, the way she was already bracing for a punishment. He decided to let it go, for now. "Go to your room, Elena, you're done." "But the stain?" "Go. That's an order." She nodded, her shoulders slumped in a strange mix of relief and defeat, and hurried past him. That night, Luca was in his own bed, but he was not asleep. He was staring at the ceiling, the name Del Rosa replaying in his mind. They were a cartel, known for their brutality. They specialized in human trafficking and retribution. They were not people you slipped on. They were people you ran from. He heard the scream at 3 a.m. It was not a yell. It was a single, high-pitched sound of pure, unadulterated terror, ripped from her throat. He was out of his bed and down the hall to the staff wing in seconds. He didn't bother with the door handle. He hit the door with his shoulder, and the cheap lock splintered. The room was pitch black. The small lamp on her nightstand was on the floor, its bulb shattered. He hit the main light switch. She was not in the bed. He found her crammed into the corner between the wardrobe and the wall, her knees drawn up, her hands over her ears. She was rocking violently, her eyes squeezed shut. "No," she was whispering, over and over, the words thick, choked. She was speaking in Spanish. "No me toques, por favor, no más, déjame ir, por favor, Dios, déjame morir. Don't touch me, please, no more, let me go, please, God, let me die." His blood ran cold. This was not a memory. This was a haunting. "Elena," she screamed again, not hearing him, and clawed at the wall, as if trying to dig through the plaster. He knelt, keeping his distance. "Elena." He made his voice low, steady, the voice he used to calm a spooked horse. "You're in Ravenhill. You are not there. "You are safe." She didn't hear him. He moved closer, and she flinched, curling into a tighter ball. "Elena." "It's Luca." He reached out and laid his hand on her head, his fingers spreading over her hair. She went rigid, her entire body locking up. "You are safe," he repeated, his voice firm, a command. He brushed the damp hair from her face. "I am here. You are safe." Slowly, the Spanish words quieted. Her rocking subsided. She opened her eyes. They were wide, unfocused, glazed with a terror he had never seen in another human being. It took a full minute for her to see him. "Luca?" she whispered. Her voice was the rough, broken sound of a child. "I'm here." He didn't ask what happened. He simply slid one arm under her knees and the other behind her back, lifting her from the floor. She was light, fragile, and trembling like a leaf. She didn't fight him. She slumped against his chest, her face burying into his shirt, her cold hands gripping his arms. He carried her out of the small, cold room, past the splintered doorframe, and through the silent, opulent halls to his own suite. He carried her into his bedroom, a vast space of dark woods and cool grays, and laid her on his bed. The sheets were cool, crisp, and smelled of him, of clean soap and power. He pulled the heavy duvet over her. She watched him, her eyes still huge, still lost. He didn't get in the bed. He pulled a large leather armchair from the corner of the room, placed it where she could see him, and sat. "Sleep," he commanded softly. "I'm not leaving." He stayed there, a silent sentinel, as she finally, fitfully, drifted into an exhausted sleep. When Elena woke, sunlight was streaming into the room. The space was enormous. She was alone. She sat up, confusion turning to panic as she realized where she was. This was his room. She was in his bed. She scrambled out, her heart hammering. He was gone. Then she saw it. On the heavy, dark wood nightstand, there was a glass of water. Beside it, a single piece of thick, cream-colored stationery, folded in half. She opened it. The handwriting was black, sharp, and angular. It was only 5 words. "You're safe here. Always." She clutched the note, the paper crinkling in her fist. She found the strength to shower in her own room and put on her uniform, but the note stayed in her pocket, a small, square weight against her leg. She was assigned to the library that day, a quiet, 2-story room lined with books that smelled of leather and old paper. She was dusting, her hands shaking, when the heavy doors clicked shut behind her. She spun around. Luca was there, leaning against the door, watching her. "We need to talk," he said. "Mr. Romano, I'm working." "Del Rosa," she flinched as if he had struck her. She dropped the dust cloth. "I know the name. Elena." He walked toward her, and she backed away, her steps clumsy, until the back of her legs hit a low reading table. "They are a cartel. They operate out of Sonora. They deal in narcotics, weapons, and people." She was shaking her head, tears welling. "I don't know what you're talking about. I heard you last night," he said, his voice dropping, becoming rough. "In your sleep, you begged someone not to touch you. You begged them to let you die." "Stop," she whispered, her voice breaking. He was in front of her now. He leaned in, placing his hands on the table on either side of her, trapping her. His proximity was overwhelming. His scent, the sheer size of him. "I am the only man in this city who can protect you from them," he said, his voice a low, intense rumble. "But I can't protect you if I don't know the truth. I need to know who you really are, or I can't protect you." Protect. The word was a trigger. It was the same word he had used, the man she ran from. He had promised to protect her, and it had been a lie. This was a trap. This man, with his kind gestures and his quiet protection, was just like the other. He was cornering her, demanding her secrets, and when he had them, he would use them. He would send her back. The panic that had been simmering under her skin for years exploded. It was pure, unthinking adrenaline. "No!" she cried, and she shoved him. She pushed against his chest with all her strength. It was a desperate, frantic act that barely moved him, but it surprised him. He stumbled back one step, his eyes wide. Elena didn't wait. She bolted, she darted around him, yanked the library door open, and ran. She flew down the main hall, her sensible shoes slipping on the polished marble. She heard him shout her name, a sharp, angry command, but she didn't stop. She burst through the massive front doors, startling the 2 guards standing post. They yelled, but she was already down the steps, running across the gravel driveway. She ran, her lungs burning, not to anywhere, just away. She sprinted down the long, winding drive, past the immaculate, manicured lawns. She could see the front gate, a towering 20-foot barrier of black wrought iron. It was her only escape. She reached it, her breath sobbing in her throat, and grabbed the cold bars, shaking them futilely. It was locked. "Let me out, please, somebody, let me out!" A black sedan, low and menacing, came tearing down the drive, its engine a deep-throated roar. It screeched to a halt just inches from her, blocking her path, the heat of the engine washing over her. Luca got out. His face was not gentle now. It was a mask of cold, possessive fury. "Get back! In the house!" "No!" she screamed, backing against the gate. "You can't keep me here. Let me go!" "You are not leaving," he said, advancing on her. "You can't make me." He grabbed her arm. His grip was steel. "I said, get back in the house. Let me go, please." She tried to pull away, but he was immovable. He grabbed her other hand, his fingers digging into her skin, and yanked her away from the gate. "Tell me the truth, Elena," he demanded, his voice echoing in the quiet of the estate. "What did they do to you?" The last of her fight evaporated. The terror, the adrenaline, the hopelessness, it all crashed down on her. Her legs gave out and she collapsed onto the sharp gravel of the driveway, her body dissolving into sobs. She was pleading, her words barely coherent. "Please, please don't make me go back. I can't go back there. They'll kill me. Please." Luca stood over her, his chest heaving. He looked down at the woman crumpled at his feet, this broken, terrified creature, and the ice in his eyes melted, replaced by a dark, simmering fire. He bent and lifted her to her feet. "No one," he said, his voice rough, "is sending you back." He led her back to the house, his hand firmly on her arm, half leading, half dragging her. He took her to his suite and slammed the heavy door, the sound final. She stood in the middle of the vast room, trembling, her face stained with tears and dust from the drive, waiting for her sentence. He stood in front of her, breathing hard. "You will not run from me again. You are not leaving this house. You are not leaving me. Do you understand?" She just stared at him, her chest aching. "They will not find you here," he said, his voice softer but no less intense. "They will not touch you here." Elena looked at him, truly looked at him, past the expensive suit and the cold power. She saw the man who had sat in the dark, the man who had left her the note, the man who was now claiming her with the same ferocity as the monsters she had fled. But his claim felt different. "Why?" she whispered, the word raw. "Why do you care?" "Because," he said, stepping closer, his voice dropping to a gravelly intimacy. "You're mine. Elena, you've been mine since you flinched at my name in the hallway." He reached out, his movement slow, deliberate, giving her time to pull away. He didn't. He brushed his thumb over her cheekbone, wiping away a tear. She didn't flinch. She didn't move. She leaned into his touch, a small, involuntary movement, as if she were a starving creature finally offered food. The contact was too much. The terror of the chase, the safety of his hand, the finality of his words, it all crested into a single, desperate, overwhelming need. She rose up on her toes, a clumsy, frantic movement, and pressed her mouth to his. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a desperate, chaotic collision. It was a plea, a surrender, a drowning woman's last grasp for air. It was salty from her tears and cold from her fear. Luca froze for 1 second, stunned by her sudden, raw initiation. Then, his hand moved from her cheek to the back of her neck, his fingers tangling in the hair at her nape. Holding her steady, he took control. He didn't kiss her violently. He didn't crush her mouth. He held her, his lips firm, warm, and possessive. He kissed her slowly, deeply, a reassurance that was also an absolute claim. He was tasting her fear, her desperation, and he was methodically, patiently erasing it. Elena trembled in his arms. Her fear was still there, a cold sickness in her stomach. But a new, shocking warmth was blooming in her chest. Desire. A feeling she thought had been carved out of her. A feeling she had associated only with pain was now mixing with her relief. She kissed him back, her hands coming up to fist in the material of his shirt, clinging to him. The kiss deepened, becoming a silent, sealed contract. It was not about lust. It was about possession. It was about safety. He was meticulous, his mouth teaching her that a kiss was not a weapon. That touch was not a prelude to pain. When he finally, slowly, pulled back, they were both breathing heavily. He rested his forehead against hers. His eyes closed. His arms were wrapped around her waist, holding her so tightly she was pinned against the solid wall of his chest. She could feel his heart beating, a slow, steady, powerful rhythm beneath her ear. He held her there in the quiet room, his body a shield against the world. He whispered the words into her hair, his voice a low, lethal promise. "Whatever it is, I'll burn the whole city down before I let it touch you again." He held her, his forehead pressed to hers, the scent of her fear and the rain on her skin filling his lungs. His promise hung in the air, a vow of annihilation that was more terrifying than any threat she had ever heard, because she believed him. "You'll burn the city," she whispered, her voice raw. "And you don't even know why. Then tell me," he said, his arms tightening around her waist, refusing to let her go. "Tell me who they are. Tell me the name that makes you shatter." She pulled back, just enough to see his eyes. They were dark, unyielding, demanding the truth that had kept her a prisoner for years. The kiss had broken the dam. The terror of her run, the exhaustion, the shame, it all came pouring out in a ragged, broken torrent. "My name," she started, her voice catching. "It isn't Elena. Not really. It was... But it's not the name they knew me by." She moved, and he let her, but only as far as the heavy velvet sofa. She sank onto it, her hands twisting in her lap. He sat not beside her, but across from her, in the same armchair he had occupied after the storm. He was giving her space, but his focus was absolute. He was a priest in a confessional, a judge in his court. "Del Rosa," she said, and the name tasted like ash. "You said their name. In the study." "I know them," Lucas said, his voice flat. "My father, he did business with them, not like you. He was weak. He laundered money, small time, but enough. He got in debt, a debt he couldn't pay with money." She looked down, her shame a physical weight. "So he paid with me." Lucas' hands, resting on the arms of the chair, clenched. His knuckles went white. "I was 17, she whispered. They married me to the leader's son, Diego. It wasn't a marriage, it was a contract, a way to own my father, to have a hostage in their house. He was a monster. Diego. He told everyone I was his wife, but I was his property." She was speaking quickly now, the words tumbling out, as if saying them fast would make them hurt less. "He was violent. He liked to show me off, but more than that, he liked to talk. He was arrogant. He would tell me about his business, about the men he'd cheated, the men he'd hurt. He didn't see me as a person. He saw me as a mirror, something to reflect his own power." She stopped, her breath catching. "And then," she said, her voice dropping to a near inaudible whisper, "he brought 3 men to the compound, rivals. He said he was going to make a deal, but he lied. He made me watch. He made me watch as he and his men, they killed them. Slowly. He was laughing." The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by Elena's shuddering breath. "That night, I knew he would never let me go. I was a witness, not just a pawn, but a witness to murder. He would kill me before he ever let me leave. So I ran. I took money I'd been hiding, just a few $100s. I climbed out a window and I just ran. I ran for 4 years. I changed my name, my hair. I worked in kitchens, in hotels, anywhere I could be invisible. I made my way north, ending up here. I thought I was finally safe. But you're not, Luca stated. It wasn't a question. She shook her head, a single tear rolling down her cheek. A few weeks ago, before I came here, I saw a man. Outside the apartment I was in, he was watching me. A man I recognized, one of Diego's guards. I left that night. I got this job. I thought I could hide here, in your fortress. But they're here. I know they are. They're in the city. Luca sat in silence for a full minute, his face carved from stone. The only movement was the slow, steady pulse in his jaw. He was processing the forced marriage, the age, the killings, the terror that had made her a ghost. When he finally spoke, his voice was so cold, so devoid of emotion. It was terrifying. They will not set foot in this city again. He stood up. The confession was over. The absolution was coming. He will never, Luca continued, his voice a low, lethal promise, touch you again. I will erase the name Del Rosa from the map. He walked to his desk and picked up his phone. Elena watched, numb, as he dialed a number. Antonio, wake up. I need a full team. I'm sending you a name. Del Rosa. I want to know everything. I want to know where they sleep, where they eat, and where they are in this city. I want eyes on every man they have. Now. He hung up. He looked at Elena, his gaze softening, but only slightly. The ice still there, just beneath the surface. You are moving. Tonight. The house, which had been a quiet sanctuary, became a hive of restrained, tense activity. The whispers Elena had heard before were nothing compared to the storm she had unleashed. She was moved from her small, Spartan room in the staff wing to a palatial guest suite on the 3rd floor, 2 doors down from Luca's own. The suite had its own sitting room, a marble bathroom, and windows that overlooked the city, but they were made of thick, reinforced glass. 2 of Luca's personal guards, men who wore black suits and looked like they had been carved from the same stone as the mansion, were posted at the end of the hall. She was no longer Elena the maid. She was now, in the eyes of the staff, something else, a secret, a possession, a problem, Mrs. Petrova delivered a set of new clothes, soft silks, cashmere, and fine wools, not a gray uniform among them. Her expression was pinched, her lips a thin line of disapproval. Mister. Romano has instructed that you are not to perform any more duties. You are to remain in this wing, for your safety. The word was a barely veiled insult. Elena was a prisoner, albeit a gilded one. The other maids wouldn't meet her eyes. She was isolated, set apart by the very protection Luca had promised. He was gone for most of the next day, lost in the mechanisms of his own power, mobilizing his investigation. Elena was left alone with her thoughts, the opulent room feeling as much like a cell as the one she had fled. That evening, Luca appeared at her door. He was in a perfectly tailored black suit, but he had shed his tie. He looked tired, but the fire in his eyes was banked, not extinguished. Come with me, he said. Where? She asked, her voice small. You haven't eaten all day. You're eating with me. He didn't take her to the cavernous dining room. He led her up a narrow, private staircase she had never known existed. It opened out onto the roof. He had arranged a table. It was set for 2, under a canopy of small, twinkling lights, surrounded by potted olive trees that shielded them from the wind. The city sprawled below them, a sea of diamonds, silent and distant, a private dinner, hidden from the gossiping staff, hidden from the world. They sat. He poured her wine, a deep, dark red. How did you know? She asked, gesturing to the lights, the food that was already waiting. I know you're scared, he said, ignoring her question. And I know you're lonely. It's a side effect of my protection. They talked. For the first time, they truly talked. He asked her about her life before, not about the cartel, but about her childhood, her father. She told him about growing up in Arizona, about her mother, who had died when she was young, about her love for gardening, a simple, earthy pleasure she hadn't indulged in years. He listened, his gaze never leaving her, absorbing every detail as if it were vital intelligence. She wore one of the new dresses, a simple, dark blue silk. As she reached for her glass, the fabric shifted, revealing the faint silvery line of a scar just above her collarbone, disappearing under the strap. She saw him notice it and instinctively pulled the fabric back up, her face flushing with shame. "Diego," she whispered, not needing to explain. He was angry. With a broken bottle." Lucas stood, his chair scraping softly. He walked around the table and stood behind her. She tensed, expecting him to leave, to be disgusted. Instead, he placed his hands on her bare shoulders, his thumbs gently rubbing the tense muscle. He bent his head, his warm breath ghosting over her skin, and he pressed his lips to the scar. Elena's eyes squeezed shut. It was not a kiss of passion. It was a kiss of reverence, of acceptance, a benediction. He held the kiss for a long moment, a silent vow to erase that memory, too. "This is a scar, Elena," he whispered against her skin, his voice a low, rough rumble. "It's proof you survived. It is not you. You are not what happened to you." He was healing her, one painful memory at a time. The peace of that night was shattered by mourning. Elena woke to the sound of raised voices, a rare breach of the house's ironclad decorum. She opened her door. The 2 guards were gone from their post, and the sound was coming from downstairs. She crept down the main staircase, her heart hammering. Luca was in the foyer, standing over one of his men, Antonio. Another man was slumped in a chair, his face bruised and bloody, his arm in a makeshift sling. It was one of the guards from the perimeter. "He was just inside the wall," Antonio was saying, his voice tight with fury. "By the south gate. He didn't see who, but there were 2 of them. They weren't trying to get in. They were testing us. They left this." Antonio held up a small, plastic evidence bag. Inside it was a single, spent bullet casing, not a common caliber. "It's theirs," Luca said. It was a statement of fact. Elena made a small sound, a stifled gasp. Luca's head snapped up. He saw her on the stairs, her face ashen, her hands pressed to her mouth. The terror was back. Sharp and suffocating. This was her fault. The man was bleeding because of her. She had brought this darkness to his door. She was a contamination. "Go back to your room," Luca commanded, his voice sharp. She turned and fled. She didn't just go to her room, she went to her closet. She pulled out the small, worn bag she had arrived with. She had nothing else. She had to leave. She could not be the reason he was hurt, the reason his men were bleeding. She would not be the downfall of the one person who had been kind to her. She waited until the house was dark. Past 3 in the morning. She opened her door. The hallway was silent. The new guards posted at the far end, near the stairs. She slipped out the service door, the one she used to use as a maid, and made her way down the back staircase. She moved like a ghost, her bare feet silent on the cold marble. She made it to the ground floor, to the side door that led to the gardens. She reached for the handle. A hand slammed flat against the wood, inches from her face. The sound was like a gunshot in the silent house, making her scream. Luca was standing behind her, his body blocking the exit. He was in the dark, a furious, looming shadow. "Did you think I wouldn't know?" His voice was not loud. It was a low, concentrated rage that was far more terrifying than any yell. "Let me go," she pleaded, trying to push past him. "They'll kill you. They're here because of me." He grabbed her by the waist, his grip bruising, and spun her around, slamming her back against the solid door. He pinned her there with his body. "You are not going anywhere," he hissed, his face inches from hers. "You are mine now. Do you understand me? You are mine to protect. You do not get to run." "You don't understand," she cried, her voice breaking, her hands beating uselessly against his chest. "You don't know them. They will burn everything you have to get to me. They'll kill you. Let them try." He cut off her next sob with his mouth. It was not the gentle, healing kiss from the rooftop. This was a kiss of pure, possessive fury. It was a brand. It was raw, angry, and desperate, a brutal statement of ownership that left no room for argument. It was not meant to hurt her, but to silence her fear, to replace it with him. He was kissing her like he was staking a claim, his mouth hard and demanding, his hand tangling in her hair, tilting her head to deepen the angle. And her fear, the panic, the desperate need to flee, it all just shattered. It broke against the unyielding wall of his protection, his sheer, stubborn will. The terror didn't vanish, but it was consumed by a different fire. A hot, sharp yearning that she had never, ever been allowed to feel. Her hands stopped beating against his chest and fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer. She kissed him back with all the broken, desperate, pent-up frustration of a lifetime spent running. He broke the kiss, but only to lift her. He swung her up into his arms, her legs wrapping around his waist, and carried her. He didn't take her back to her suite. He took her to his. He kicked his bedroom door shut and carried her to the massive bed, laying her gently on the cool, dark sheets. The room was lit only by the low glow of the city lights outside. He stood over her for a moment, his chest heaving, his eyes black in the dimness. He was making a choice. She was making one, too. He saw the fear still lingering in her eyes, but it was warring with a new, trembling desire. He didn't pounce. He moved slowly. He sat on the edge of the bed, his hand coming up to trace the line of her jaw. His touch was a question, not a demand. "You're safe, Elena," he murmured, his voice rough. "Here. With me. Always." Her fear of him was gone. All that was left was the fear of her past, and he was the only man strong enough to fight it. She reached up, her trembling hand covering his. It was her trust, offered in a single, simple gesture. It was her choice. He lowered his head and kissed her. This kiss was different again. It was slow. It was deep. It was meticulous. It was a promise to undo every bad touch, every moment of pain. He unwove the past with his hands, his mouth. He was unwriting a history of pain. His touch was reverent on her skin, his hands moving over her waist, her arms, her shoulders, as if memorizing her. He was not taking. He was giving. He was giving her safety. He was giving her control. She met his gaze in the dim light, and for the first time, there was no fear in her eyes. Only a deep, aching vulnerability. Only choice. Her fear, which had been her constant companion, finally gave way. It was replaced by a deep, sharp yearning that was just as powerful. Her trust was a tangible thing, a silent offering as she let herself be truly vulnerable in his arms. It was a surrender not to him, but to the safety he offered, a final, shuddering release of the terror she had carried for so long. Much later, as she slept, her body finally pliant, her breathing deep and even, curled against his side. Luca lay awake. He stared at the ceiling, his arm wrapped protectively around her, his hand resting on her hip. He thought of the scar on her collarbone. He thought of the words she had whispered in her nightmare. He thought of the bruised and beaten guard. His jaw tightened, and a cold, brutal calm settled over him. He knew who had sent those men. He knew what they wanted. He thought of the man, Diego del Rosa, who had dared to put that scar on her, who had dared to hunt her. And in the darkness of the room, he made a silent, lethal vow. "I will find him," he whispered to the sleeping woman beside him, "and I will cut off every finger on the hand that ever dared to touch you." The morning after, the house was silent. Elena woke in his bed, the sheets smelling of him, and for the first time in her adult life, she did not wake with a jolt of terror. She woke slowly, her body heavy and relaxed, her limbs tangled with his. Luca was already awake, his arm slung possessively over her waist, his gaze fixed on the ceiling. He was thinking. She could feel the coiled tension in him, the controlled energy of a mind already at war. He felt her stir and turned his head, his dark eyes meeting hers. He said nothing, but his hand tightened on her hip, a simple, grounding gesture. "You are here. You are safe." The quiet was broken an hour later. Luca was in his study, Elena sitting on the leather sofa, tucked under a cashmere blanket, when his private line rang. He picked it up. "Antonio!" He listened. Elena watched his face. It was already a mask, but she saw the fractional tightening of his jaw, the way his eyes went flat and cold. "How many?" he asked. He listened again. "And the witness status is confirmed?" A pause. Find the source of the bounty. I want the name of the man who approved it. Burn whatever networks you have to find him." He hung up the phone, not with a slam, but with a slow, deliberate finality. "They've put a price on your head," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. Elena's blood ran cold. "What?" "A silent bounty, circulated among the cartels and the major families. They want you alive." He turned to face her, his expression grim. "Your confession in the library, the one about the murders. You were the only witness. Diego del Rosa was sloppy. He let you see his face, and he let you live. This isn't just an honor killing for an escaped wife. This is cleaning up a loose end." He hit the intercom on his desk. "Get me Sal, Marco, and every capo in a 10-mile radius. Emergency meeting, my study. 10 minutes. Within 15 minutes, the room was full. These were not the men from the kitchen. These were the men who ran his organization. They were hard-eyed, silent, and radiated a lethal competence. They lined the walls, their expressions respectful but tense. They knew an order like this meant war. Elena sat on the sofa, clutching the blanket, feeling small and utterly exposed. "The house is on lockdown," Luca began, his voice clipping through the silence. He stood behind his desk, a general addressing his troops. "As of this moment, Elena is the primary security objective. Full-spectrum protection, day and night, 2 men with her at all times. No one, and I mean no one, not staff, not family, not me, gets near her without a visual clearance from Antonio or myself. Is that clear?" A chorus of "Yes, boss," rumbled through the room. "She does not leave this house. All perimeters are to be doubled. Any vehicle that slows within 100 yards of the gate is flagged. Anyone asking questions, anyone looking too long, you bring them to me. The Del Rosa cartel has put a bounty on her. They are actively hunting her in our city. This is not just an insult, it is an act of war." He looked around the room, his gaze landing on each man, a silent, binding contract. "She is under my protection. Any man who fails in this, any man who lets them get close, will answer to me personally." The men filed out, the air thick with unspoken violence. Elena was left alone with Luca, the weight of his declaration crushing her. He had just staked his entire organization on her life. The next few days were a suffocating hell of protection. The 2 guards were shadows, standing outside her door, following her at a distance if she walked to the library. The house staff, who had already been gossiping, now treated her with a mixture of fear and resentment. She was the reason the fortress was locked down. She was the reason their bags were being searched when they entered and left. She was the boss's woman, a dangerous liability. The pressure mounted, the safety of the mansion. Once a comfort, now felt like the walls of a cage. The guards, with their holstered weapons and their ever-present, watchful eyes, were not a comfort. They were a reminder. They were a reminder of other guards, other men who watched, other men who carried guns. She started to slip. The flashbacks came not just at night, but in the daylight. The scent of a guard's cologne would make her stomach clench. The sound of a heavy boot on the marble floor would make her jump. She stopped eating. Luca found her on the 4th day, in the large, empty ballroom. She was standing in the center of the vast, polished floor, staring at the crystal chandelier, her body rigid, her hands twisting the fabric of her dress. "Elena," he said, his voice soft, not wanting to startle her. She turned, and her face was a mask of terror. Her eyes were wide, unseeing. She was not in Ravenhill. "He said," she whispered, her voice a dry rasp, "that he liked to see the light on the crystal. He said it was the same light that shone on the blade. He said I was just another pretty, useless thing he owned. Elena, stop! You're here!" He walked toward her slowly. "I can't get it off me," she sobbed, her composure finally shattering. She began to scratch at her arms, her nails digging into her own skin. "I'll never be clean. He touched me. They all looked at me. They used me. I'm ruined. I'm dirty. How can you touch me?" She collapsed, her knees giving out, dissolving into a broken heap on the floor, her sobs echoing in the vast, empty room. Luca was there in an instant. He knelt in front of her, but he didn't just pull her into a hug. He grabbed her face, his hands firm, his thumbs on her tear-soaked cheeks, and forced her to look at him. His touch was not cruel, but it was absolute. "Look at me," he commanded. His voice was rough, scraping with a raw, controlled emotion. "You listen to me. You are not ruined. You are not dirty. Do you hear me?" She tried to look away, to hide in her shame, but he held her fast. "You survived them," he said, his voice vibrating with a fierce intensity. "You got out. You ran for 4 years with nothing but your own strength. They tried to break you, and you let them think they had, and then you ran. You are the strongest person I have ever met. You are not ruined. You are a survivor, and you are mine." He pulled her against him, his arms a steel cage, his hand burying in her hair, holding her head against his chest. He held her as she wept, absorbing her pain, her shame, his own quiet fury a living thing in the room. "I'm going to end this, Elena," he murmured against her hair. "I'm going to end them." The next day, he came to her room. He held up a dress. It was not a simple silk. It was a gown, the color of a deep, midnight sky, elegant and severe. "You're coming with me tonight," he said. Her blood chilled. "What? Out? Luca, no. The bounty. You said I couldn't leave." "You are not leaving. You are making a statement. We are going to the Opera Foundation Gala. It is the one night a year all the families gather on neutral ground, and you will be on my arm." "No," she pleaded. "I can't. They'll see me. They'll be there." "That is the point," he said, his eyes hard. "They will see you, and they will see that you are with me. They have issued a bounty. I am issuing a declaration. Get dressed." The gala was a sea of glittering jewels and veiled threats. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the unspoken rivalries of the city's criminal elite. When Luca Romano walked in, a hush fell over the grand lobby. When they saw the woman on his arm, the hush turned into a wave of sharp, indrawn breaths and frantic whispers. Elena was transformed. Her hair was down, styled in soft waves that framed a face that was pale but resolute. The gown fit her perfectly, its dark color a stark contrast to her skin. She wore no jewels except for a simple, elegant pair of diamond earrings Luca had given her, saying, "They are for you, not for them." Her hand was on his arm, and her grip was tight enough to bruise, but she held her head high. She was terrified, but she was leaning on his strength. Luca moved through the room as if he owned it. He nodded to some, ignored others. Every eye was on them. Every mafia boss, every capo, every wife was staring at the ghost Luca Romano had claimed. "Luca," a man said, stepping into his path. He was older, with silver hair and the dangerous eyes of a shark. It was Don Falcone, a rival, but an old-school one. "You come to the party, and you bring a new friend. You have not introduced us." Luca stopped. He turned, his body angling slightly, protectively, in front of Elena. His gaze was cold. "This is Elena," he said, his voice carrying in the quiet. "She is with me." It was not an introduction. It was a coronation. "She is with me. In their world." Those 4 words were a binding contract, a public claim stronger than any marriage license. He was declaring her his, and by extension, declaring that any move against her was a direct move against him. Don Falcone's eyes widened slightly. He understood. This was Luca, the wolf, drawing a line in blood for the entire city to see. "I see," Falcone said, his voice smooth. "A lovely addition. Enjoy the opera. Luca." They sat through the performance, but neither of them heard a note. Elena's entire body vibrated with tension. Luca's hand rested on his knee, inches from the gun she knew was in a holster under his jacket. They left early, during the first intermission. The statement had been made. Luca's hand was on the small of her back as they walked through the lobby. His men, 4 of them, were in a tight diamond formation around them. They reached the portico, the cool night air hitting them. The valet was bringing the car around. It happened in less than 3 seconds. 2 men, dressed in the valet's red uniform, burst from the side, moving with disciplined speed. They were not valets. They were soldiers. One grabbed for Elena. "Diego sends his regards. Puta." before his fingers could even graze the fabric of her dress. Luca was in motion. He shoved Elena back, hard, into the arms of his bodyguard, yelling, "Car! Now!" Luca turned, drawing his weapon in a single, fluid motion. But the second man was already there. He fired. It was not a loud bang, but a suppressed thwack. Elena screamed as Luca grunted, a sharp exhalation of pain. He stumbled back a step, a dark stain blossoming on the white fabric of his shirt. High on his shoulder. He didn't go down. He raised his own weapon and fired twice. 2 precise, controlled shots. The first man, the one who had grabbed for her, dropped. The second man, the shooter, was already falling, his chest hit by Luca's men, who had opened fire almost simultaneously. It was over. The lobby was in chaos, people screaming, diving for cover. Antonio grabbed Elena. "He's fine. Get in the car." She was shoved into the back of the armored sedan. Luca piled in after her, his face pale and tight with pain, but his gun still in his hand. "Go! Go!" The car tore away from the curb, leaving the 2 bodies and a scene of pure panic behind. They were back at the mansion in less than 10 minutes. The house doctor was waiting, summoned by a single text from Antonio. "Get his jacket off," the doctor ordered. A nervous, balding man who was clearly terrified of his patient. Elena's hands were shaking so violently she could barely function, but a cold calm was settling over her. She ripped the ruined, blood-soaked fabric of the suit jacket. Luca hissed in pain as she pulled it from his shoulder. "It went through," the doctor said, his voice relieved. "Clean, a through and through. You are a very lucky man. Mr. Romano, but it will need stitches, and it will hurt like hell." Elena was the one who got the bowl of hot water. She was the one who held the cloth to the wound as the doctor prepared his needle. She was the one whose hand Luca gripped when the needle went in. Her hands were steady now, her fear burned away, replaced by a focused, white-hot rage. An hour later, he was clean, stitched, and bandaged. The doctor had given him a shot for the pain and left a bottle of antibiotics. He was sitting on the edge of his bed, Elena standing in front of him, her whole body trembling with the adrenaline crash. "This is my fault," she whispered, her voice cracking. "He shot you. Because of me." Luca, his face pale and slick with a new sweat, reached out with his good hand and grabbed her wrist. He pulled her closer, until she was standing between his knees. He took her hand and pressed it flat against his chest, over his heart. His skin was hot. A fever was already setting in from the shock and the wound. "This," he said, his voice a low, rough rasp, "beats because of you. Do you understand? It beats because of you. I would take 10 more bullets. I would take 1,000. It does not matter. All that matters is that they did not touch you." Tears streamed down her face, but she didn't make a sound. That night, she refused to leave him. The fever took hold. As the doctor had warned, he was restless. Lost in a haze of pain and medication, Elena stayed. She got a bowl of cool water and a cloth, and she sat on the edge of the bed, bathing his face, his neck. She was no longer his maid, no longer his protected ward. She was his partner. She tended to him through the long, dark hours. At some point, exhausted, she lay down on the mattress beside him, her head on the pillow next to his, her hand resting on his chest, feeling the steady, labored beat of his heart. She must have dozed. She woke in the small, gray hours before dawn. The room was cold. Luca's fever had broken. His skin was cool and damp. His eyes were open. He was watching her, his gaze clear and lucid. The pain and fever receded. He lifted his good hand, his movements slow, and brushed a strand of hair back from her face. His fingers were rough, calloused, but his touch was incredibly gentle. She watched him, her heart aching. "I never believed in fate," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "I believed in leverage, in power, in money. Fate was a weakness, an excuse." He threaded his fingers into her hair, his thumb stroking her temple. "Until you." He pulled her closer, his mouth finding hers in the darkness. It was a kiss stripped of all passion, all anger. It was a kiss of pure, desperate vulnerability. It was a confession. She kissed him back, tasting the salt of his skin and the faint, metallic tang of his pain. When he finally pulled away, he didn't let her go. He just held her, his bandaged shoulder protesting, his eyes closing. Elena lay there, her head on his good shoulder, and watched the window. She saw the first pale, sickly gray light of the new day begin to creep over the city. She helped him stand, wrapping a heavy blanket around his shoulders, and they walked to the balcony. They stood together in the cold, biting air, watching the sun rise. It painted the sky in shades of bruised purple and bloody orange. It was beautiful, and it was terrible. It was the color of a war that had just begun. The sunrise they had watched together felt like a lifetime ago. The truce, the brief, fragile peace of that dawn was shattered before the city was even fully awake. Antonio found Luca in the study, where he was wincing as he moved his newly stitched shoulder. The news was delivered without preamble, in the low, urgent tones of a man delivering a death sentence. "Boss, we have a problem, a big one. The gala wasn't just a statement, it was a confirmation." Confirmation of what? Luca's voice was rough. They knew she was here. In the city. They didn't know where. Now they do. They tracked her fake identity. It was sloppy. Made 4 years ago by a low-level contact in Arizona. They've been tracking that name's credit and utility pings for years. The trail went cold until she got the job here. They've known she was in Ravenhill for almost a month. Luca's blood chilled. She had been in his house, and they had been waiting. The attack at the gala wasn't an attempt. It was a test, to see who she was with. And he had answered, claiming her in front of the entire world. "They're coming," Luca said. It wasn't a question. "They're already here," Antonio confirmed. "They have a compound, an old tannery upstate, but they'll be moving on the house. They have nothing to lose." Luca looked at the reinforced windows of his study, his fortress. It was no longer a sanctuary. It was a target. He could fight them. He could win. But he could not, and would not. Fight a war with Elena in the next room. He made the decision in a second. Get the car, the untraceable one, and get Ben and Marco. My best. They're taking her to the lodge. Now. He found her in his bedroom, sleeping, her face still pale from the night's ordeal. He hated to wake her. He sat on the bed and brushed his hand over her hair. Her eyes fluttered open. "Luca, is your shoulder?" "Get dressed," he said, his voice hard, leaving no room for argument. "You're leaving." The panic was instant. She sat bolt upright, the sheets pooling around her waist. "What? No, I'm not leaving you. Not after last night. You're hurt. I'm staying." "This is not a negotiation. Elena." He stood, his back to her, unable to watch her fear. "They know you're here. They know who you are. The house is compromised. I'm moving you somewhere safe." "Safe?" Her voice was thin, incredulous. "I am safer with you than I am anywhere else. You said so. You promised." "I'm protecting you," he roared, turning on her, his control snapping. His injured shoulder screamed in protest. "I cannot cut the head off this snake if I am worried every second that they are coming over the wall for you. I need you gone. I need you secure. Then I can end this. Do you understand?" She understood. He was sending her away so he could go to war. The goodbye happened in the sterile, concrete silence of the underground garage. The black armored SUV was waiting, its engine a low, ominous rumble. Ben, a mountain of a man who had been with Luca for 10 years, stood by the driver's door. Marco, younger, leaner, but with the same cold eyes, stood by the back. Elena was shaking. "Please," she whispered, her hands gripping the front of his shirt. "Don't make me go. I just found you. Don't send me away." He grabbed her, his good arm crushing her to him, his injured one coming up to hold her head, his fingers tangling in her hair. He kissed her. It was not a kiss of passion, or anger, or tenderness. It was a kiss of pure, desperate, agonizing fear. It was the kiss of a man who was terrified that this was the last time. It was a promise, a brand, a frantic attempt to pour all of his strength into her. "This is not goodbye," he growled against her mouth, his voice rough with an emotion he refused to name. "This is wait for me. Ben and Marco will die before they let anyone near you. I will finish this, and I will come for you." He pulled away, his hand lingering on her cheek. "I love you," she whispered, the words finally spoken, tasting like a confession. His eyes, dark and tortured, met hers. He didn't say it back. He didn't have to. His entire war was for her. He nodded once, a sharp, broken gesture, and put her in the car. He slammed the door. He watched through the black, tinted glass as the SUV sped up the ramp and disappeared into the morning light. He was left alone in the echoing garage, the scent of her on his skin, the taste of her on his lips, and a cold, gaping void where she had been. The safe house was 100 miles north, a remote hunting lodge built of heavy timber and dark stone, nestled in the dense, silent woods. It was beautiful, but it was a cage. Elena was left there with her thoughts and the 2 guards. Ben stayed outside, patrolling the perimeter. Marco stayed inside, quiet, watchful, polite. The silence was worse than the gunfire. She was alone, with no way to know if Luca was alive or dead. The fear she felt was no longer for herself, but for him. And she realized, with a sickening lurch, that he had gone to war for her, and he still didn't know the whole truth. He didn't know the weakest, most shameful parts. She found a pen and some plain stationery in a desk drawer, and she wrote, "Luca, you're fighting for a woman you don't fully know. You called me strong. You're wrong. I have to tell you the truth I was too ashamed to say after the first month with Diego, when I realized what my life was. I tried to end it. I stole a bottle of his pills. I was a coward. I couldn't do it. I fell asleep on the floor holding them, and he found me. He laughed. He said I was too weak to even die right. You said I survived. But it wasn't just survival. I was planning to kill him. The night I ran, I wasn't just escaping. I had a knife I'd stolen from the kitchen. I was going to stab him in his sleep. I was going to be a murderer. Is that strong? Or is that just another kind of monster? I'm so scared, not of them. I'm scared of what I am. I'm scared that I'll never be clean of what they did, of what I almost did. I love you. I know that with every part of me, but I feel like a ghost. Luca, I'm ruined. How can you build a life with someone who is already broken? I'm terrified I'm just bringing you death. I'm not worth this. I am not worth you. Please be safe. Elena." When Ben came in for his rotation, she folded the letter and pressed it into his hand. "Please, can you get this to him? I don't know how, but please. He needs to know." Ben, his face unreadable, nodded. "I'll send it with the supply runner. He'll have it tonight." Luca was in his study, which had been converted into a war room. Maps of the tannery compound were spread across his desk. He was strapping on a lightweight Kevlar vest, hissing as it pulled on his shoulder. Antonio was loading magazines. Ben's man arrived, and the letter was placed on the desk. Luca stopped, his blood running cold at the sight of her handwriting. He tore it open. He read it. Once, twice. His face, which had been a mask of cold fury, dissolved for a single second. The line about her suicide attempt, the line about her being a coward, the line about her feeling unworthy. He didn't crumple the letter. He folded it, slowly, meticulously, and tucked it into the inner pocket of his jacket, the one that sat directly over his heart. It was a shield, more powerful than the Kevlar. It was his why. He turned to Antonio, his eyes no longer human. They were the eyes of an executioner. "We're accelerating the timeline," he said, his voice a low growl. "We move, tonight." At the safe house, the sun was setting. Elena was watching the trees turn to black skeletons against the purple sky. Ben was on patrol. Marco was in the kitchen, making coffee. She heard a sound, a soft thud, from downstairs, out on the porch. "Ben?" she called out, her heart lurching. Silence. Then, a single, suppressed thwack. The sound was identical to the one at the gala. Elena stopped breathing. The door to her room clicked open. It was Marco. He was holding his gun, and he was not alone. Behind him stood 2 men, men she recognized, men with the dead eyes of Del Rosa's personal guard. You, she stammered, backing away. He paid well, Marco said with a casual shrug. But Del Rosa paid more. You were always easy to track. Princesa, Ben was loyal, a fool, but loyal. No, she whispered, her world dissolving. The betrayal was absolute. There was no escape. She didn't scream. She grabbed the heavy glass lamp from the nightstand and threw it. She fought. She clawed at Marco's face, her nails seeking purchase. But he was too strong. He hit her. A hard, open-palmed strike that sent her crashing to the floor, her vision exploding in white stars. They grabbed her. A black, rough-smelling bag was shoved over her head. The darkness returned, suffocating her, bringing back the memories, the old terror. She was dragged out, her feet stumbling on the porch, past Ben's unmoving body, and thrown into the back of a van. Luca was putting on his jacket. His men, a team of 20, geared up in the driveway. When his satellite phone rang, it was the safe house's emergency line. He answered it. Ben. Report. Silence. Then a low, cruel laugh that he recognized from his nightmares of Elena's. Ben is unavailable, the voice drawled. It was Diego. We have your property, Romano, a little damaged from the trip, but still usable. She looks good, even with the bruising. She always liked it rough. You know. Luca's hand crushed the phone. The plastic and circuits cracking under the pressure. A sound, low and animalistic, tore from his throat. He swept his good arm across the entire desk, sending laptops, monitors, maps, and glasses crashing to the marble floor in a symphony of destruction. He slammed his good fist, into the plaster wall, leaving a crater. Antonio and Sal stood by the door, unmoving, their faces pale. They had never seen their boss lose control. This was not anger. This was a biblical, annihilating rage. Luca turned, his chest heaving, his face white, his eyes two black holes of pure, undiluted hatred. The tannery, he breathed. He took her to the tannery. He grabbed his jacket. The letter from Elena a square of heat against his heart. He looked at his men, his voice dropping to a lethal, final command. We are not taking prisoners. We are not negotiating. We are leveling that building. Find her. Burn it all. The convoy of black, silent SUVs did not slow as it approached the tannery. It smashed through the chain-link gate as if it were paper. The compound erupted. It was not a battle. It was a cleansing. Luca's men, disciplined, professional, and fueled by their boss's fury, moved through the dark yard, neutralizing guards before they could even raise their weapons. Luca was at the front. He moved with a terrifying, singular purpose, his injured shoulder forgotten. He was a machine, a predator. His only thought, He cleared the main warehouse himself, his gun firing with a steady, clinical rhythm, his mind cold and sharp, in a dark, damp processing room in the back. Elena was tied to a steel chair. Her face was bruised, her lips split. She was shaking, but her eyes were dry. She had no more tears. Diego del Rosa circled her, his hand trailing over her hair. He was handsome, slick, and rotting from the inside. He really hurt you, didn't he? Diego said, tisking at her bruised face. My men get so overeager, but it doesn't matter. Did you really think that Gavacho could protect you? Did you think you were special? You were born to be owned, Elena. You were my father's property. Then you were my property. And now you are just a toy he was playing with. But I'm taking my toy back. He raised his hand, his signet ring glinting in the single, bare bulb. You need to be reminded of your place. Boom! The heavy steel door didn't open. It exploded from its hinges, flying across the room and crashing into a rusted vat. Luca stood in the doorway, wreathed in dust and smoke. He was a vision from hell. His suit was torn, his face streaked with grime, his shoulder bleeding fresh, dark blood through his shirt. His gun was level, his hand rock steady. His eyes found Elena. Then they found Diego. Diego, recovering his shock, scrambled. He grabbed Elena, yanking her up from the chair and using her as a human shield, pressing the barrel of his gun to her temple. One more step, Romano, he screamed, his voice high with panic. I swear to God, I'll paint the wall with her brains. Lucas stopped. He was 10 feet away. He was breathing hard, the air sawing in his lungs. He and Diego stared at each other, the only two men in the world. Let her go, Diego, you took what was mine, Diego shrieked. She is mine. You think you're a king? You're nothing. And she is just a worthless... Luca didn't negotiate. He didn't bargain. He fired. The shot was deafening in the small room. It wasn't aimed at Diego's head. It was aimed at his knee. Diego screamed, a thin, surprised sound. As his leg disintegrated, he buckled. His grip on Elena's arm loosened for a fraction of a second. It was all she needed. She threw her head back, smashing it into his nose, and dropped, twisting away. Luca didn't hesitate. He fired 3 more times, 3 perfect controlled shots to the center of Diego's chest. The man was thrown backward, his gun clattering to the concrete floor, his eyes wide with the final, ultimate surprise, silence. The ringing in Elena's ears was deafening. She was on the floor, her hands still tied, her breath coming in ragged, painful sobs. Luca's gun fell from his numb hand. The strength, the rage, the adrenaline that had held him up suddenly evaporated. He stumbled, falling to his knees in front of her. He didn't speak. He just reached for her, his hands fumbling with the ropes at her wrists, his good arm pulling her to him. He wrapped his arms around her, crushing her against his chest, his injured shoulder screaming. But he didn't care. He buried his face in her hair, his body shaking. He was holding her. She was alive. She was his. Elena clung to him, her face pressed into his neck, her body dissolving into tremors. She sobbed, not in fear, not in pain. It was the sound of a soul that had finally been allowed to break. He held her, rocking her gently on the cold, dirty floor, surrounded by death. Antonio appeared at the doorway, took in the scene. Diego's body, his boss on his knees, holding the woman, and silently turned, raising his hand to his men. Guard the door. No one enters. Luca pulled back, just enough to see her face. His calloused, blood-streaked thumb gently, reverently, traced the line of her bruised cheek, wiping away a tear. He looked at her split lip, and a fresh, cold wave of fury pulsed through him. But his voice, when he finally spoke, was a rough, broken whisper, a vow spoken to her, to the universe, to God. "No one touches her," he said, his forehead resting against hers. "No one ever will again." The private hospital room was white, sterile, and silent, a stark contrast to the blood and concrete of the tannery. Elena had been there for 3 days, drifting in a haze of painkillers and exhaustion. She had 2 cracked ribs, a fractured wrist, and a constellation of deep, purple bruises that mapped the story of her capture. She had survived. Luca had not left her side. He sat in a large, uncomfortable visitor's chair, his own shoulder heavily bandaged, his arm in a black sling. He had refused treatment for himself until Elena had been seen, stabilized, and settled. He had refused to go home. He hadn't slept. He just watched her, his face a grim, exhausted mask, his eyes tracking the slow, steady beep of the heart monitor as if it were the only thing in the world. His men, Antonio, Sal, the whole organization, had moved with brutal efficiency in his absence. The news filtered in quietly. The Del Rosa cartel was not just broken, it was erased. With Diego and his top lieutenants dead, the organization had fractured. Rivals, smelling blood, had torn the remnants apart. Internal betrayals, fueled by Luca's quiet, targeted payments, had finished the job. The name that had haunted Elena for 4 years was now just a footnote in a long, bloody history. But the victory felt hollow in the quiet of the hospital room. The monsters were dead, but their ghosts remained. Elena struggled. As the painkillers wore off, the physical pain was sharp, but the emotional pain was a dull, crushing weight. She was quiet. She would stare at the white ceiling for hours, her eyes blank. She felt dirty, broken. The violence of the rescue, the terror of the capture, the betrayal by Marco, it had all just confirmed her deepest fear. She was a contagion. She brought death. She was ruined. Luca never pressured her. He, a man of commands and ultimatums, was now a creature of absolute, unwavering patience. He didn't ask her what she was thinking. He didn't demand she feel better. He just stayed. He showed up with things. Small, simple things, On the fourth day, he brought in a small, potted gardenia, its white blossom fragrant in the sterile air. The room smelled like chemicals, he said, his voice rough. You should have something that smells like life. He brought her favorite tea, the simple chamomile she used to drink in the staff kitchen, in a porcelain cup from the mansion. He held it to her lips himself, his good hand steady. She flinched when the nurses touched her, her body still tensing for a blow, but she never flinched from him. His touch was the only anchor she had. On the fifth day, she was sitting up in bed, her arm in a plaster cast, her gaze lost somewhere out the window. Luca had been quiet for an hour. "Your letter," he said, his voice low. Elena's head snapped toward him, her eyes wide with a new, sharp shame. The letter, the confession, he knew. "The one you sent with Ben?" he continued, his voice soft. He reached into his jacket, which was draped over the chair, and pulled out the folded, creased piece of paper. It was stained, she saw, with a small, dark speck of his blood from the tannery. He had kept it. "Luca, she started, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry. You shouldn't have to. I'm not—" "You're not what?" he asked, moving to sit on the edge of her bed. He was careful, his movements slow, his larger body a contrast to her fragility. "I'm not strong," she whispered, the tears she thought were gone returning, hot and shameful. "I told you, I was a coward. I was going to be a murderer. I'm broken." Luca looked at her, his dark eyes holding hers, his gaze stripping away all the layers of her shame. He knelt. He, Luca Romano, the king of Ravenhill, knelt on the cold linoleum floor beside her hospital bed, so his eyes were level with hers. He took her good hand, her left hand, and held it between his two large ones. "You were 17, he said, his voice a low, rough rumble. "A child, trapped in a cage with monsters, and you found a way to fight. You tried to escape one way. When that didn't work, you planned another. You stole a knife. You were going to fight a man twice your size, a killer with a kitchen knife." He shook his head, a look of raw, wondering awe on his face. "Elena," he said, his voice thick, "you didn't survive because you were lucky. You survived because you are a fighter. You saved yourself a long time ago. I just showed up at the end. I just made sure no one undid it." He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a gesture of fealty, of pure, unadulterated respect. He was not just healing her. He was seeing her. That was the turning point, the healing. After that was slow, but it was steady. Elena's body mended, her ribs knitted, her wrist, set and cast, began to ache instead of scream. And her soul, tended to by the most dangerous, patient man in the city, began to unfurl. Their bond became a thing of quiet, shared spaces. It was no longer the desperate, frantic passion of a rescue. It was real. It was him reading reports in his chair while she slept. His presence a silent guard. It was her, a week later, helping him redress the wound on his shoulder. Her touch now confident and steady. Her anger at the scar a shared, silent thing. When she was finally discharged, the return to Ravenhill was surreal. The house was the same, the marble floors just as cold, the windows just as vast, but she was different. The staff, Mrs. Petrova included, looked at her with a new, profound respect. She was not the boss's mistress. She was not a liability. She was the woman he had burned the world for. She was the lady of the house. That night, Luca showed her to the guest suite she had used before, the one on the third floor. It was beautiful, filled with fresh flowers, her new clothes neatly hung in the closet. "This is your room," he said, his voice neutral. He was giving her a choice, an escape. "My room is just down the hall. The guards are gone from the corridor. You are safe here. No one will ever enter this house again without my permission." She looked at the vast, empty, beautiful room. Then she looked at him. He looked exhausted. His sling finally off, but his shoulder still stiff, his power still a heavy cloak around him. But she saw the vulnerability in his eyes. He was giving her space, terrified she would take it. She walked past him, out of the guest room and down the hall to his suite. She opened the door to his bedroom. the room that smelled of him, the room where she had first felt safe. She turned. "This is my room," she said, her voice quiet, but unbroken. He followed her, his relief a visible, tangible thing. That night, she did not sleep on the edge of the bed, a temporary guest. She did not sleep as a victim, seeking sanctuary. She chose to sleep in his arms, her head on his chest, her casted arm resting on his stomach. He held her, his breathing finally deep and even. They were home. 2 weeks later, her cast was off, replaced by a simple brace. She was sitting in the study, reading, when Luca came in. He placed a heavy, official-looking envelope on the desk in front of her. "What is this?" "It's your new life," he said. He opened it. Inside was a new passport, a new driver's license, a birth certificate, all pristine, all completely, untraceably legal, bought with the kind of money and power only he possessed. The name on them was Elisa Bianchi. The photo was of her, taken a week ago, her face healed, her eyes clear. Elisa Bianchi has a clean history, a substantial bank account, and a small, beautiful apartment in Florence. "Italy," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "She has no past, no ties. She is free. It's an escape. If you want it, if this," he gestured to the house, to himself, "is too much, you can go. You will be safe. No one will ever find you." He was offering her the one thing she had craved for 4 years, an exit, a way to be free, not just of Del Rosa, but of him, of his world, of the violence that had brought them together. Elena looked at the face of Elisa Bianchi. The woman looked nice. She also looked like a stranger. She picked up the new passport. She felt the smooth, crisp cover. She thought of the fear, the running, the life spent looking over her shoulder. Then she thought of Luca, kneeling by her bed, his hand over hers. She tore it in half. Luca's head snapped up, his eyes wide with shock. She tore the passport again, and then the driver's license, and then the birth certificate. She ripped the paper into small, useless pieces. "Elena," he breathed, confused. "I don't want to be Elisa Bianchi," she said, her voice clear, steady, and strong. "And I am not the ghost who came to this house. My name is Elena." She stood and walked around the desk to him. "I'm done running." He stood to meet her, his gaze searching her face, seeing the iron resolution there. He saw the woman who had been willing to stab a killer, the woman who had fought him at the gate, the woman who had held him through a fever. "This life," he said, his voice rough, "it's not easy. It's dark. I'm not afraid of the dark," she said. "Not anymore, and not when you're in it with me." That night, something shifted. The last piece of the lock clicked into place. For weeks, their intimacy had been one of comfort, of chaste kisses, of him holding her while she slept. It had been the slow, gentle rebuilding of her trust. But now, there was no fear left, only a deep, profound, and aching love. They were in his bed, the city lights a distant glow. He was kissing her temple, his hand stroking her hair, his touch gentle, as it always was. She turned her head. She captured his mouth with hers. It was not a desperate, frantic kiss. It was not a plea. It was a statement. It was a choice. He stilled, surprised by her sudden, confident initiation. He let her lead. She kissed him slowly, deeply, her good hand coming up to cup his jaw, her fingers tracing the rough stubble. She was the one in control. She was the one setting the pace. She was not a victim being taken. She was a woman choosing. Her fear was gone, replaced by a pure, liquid heat. It was a desire she had thought was dead, a part of her she thought had been carved out and murdered. But he had brought it back to life. He had shown her that touch was not a weapon, that intimacy was not ownership. It was a shared vulnerability. She initiated every step. Every touch was a question she answered herself. It was a slow, emotional, and deeply sensual reclamation of her own body. It was no longer about fear. It was, finally, about love. It was about choice. And in his arms, she finally, truly let go. The story ended as it had begun, in the garden. It was spring, months later. The cold of Ravenhill had given way to a bright, defiant green. The garden she had once walked alone, a ghost in a gray uniform, was now in full, riotous bloom, filled with the gardenias she loved. She was standing by the wall, her face tilted to the afternoon sun. She was not in a uniform. She wore a simple, yellow dress, her hair long and free. She heard him approach, his footsteps solid, familiar. She didn't flinch. She smiled, turning as his arms wrapped around her from behind. He pulled her back against his chest, his chin resting on her head, his hands covering hers, which rested on his arms. They stood together, watching the light. "You're thinking," he murmured into her hair. "I was remembering," she said, her voice steady, the old tremor completely gone. "I was remembering the first time I walked here. I was so terrified. I thought this was just another cage, and you were just another jailer." She leaned her head back against his shoulder, his solid, unyielding strength. "You were the first man I ever met who didn't try to break me." Luca held her, his heart, which he had thought was a dead, useless muscle, full to the point of aching. He remembered the frightened ghost from part 1. He looked at the strong, whole woman in his arms. He kissed her temple. A soft, permanent vow. "That's because you were already whole," he whispered. "You just needed someone to see it. Thank you so much for listening to this story." We hope the journey of Elena and Luca touched your heart. We would love to hear from you. Please, let us know where in the world you are listening from in the comments below. Your thoughts and feedback mean everything to us. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to Mafia Romance Stories for more tales of danger, passion, and unbreakable love. And do not forget to share your thoughts on this story in English. We cannot wait to read them.